What you're about to watch right now is the first Linux Sucks show in over 2 years to be recorded live. That's right. I mean, there's no studio audience here. Normally, I do these things with a whole bunch of people that point and heckle and tell me how wrong I am. And that's part of what makes Linux Sucks so magical. I've been doing these things since 2009, I don't know, something like that. And I miss the crowds. I miss the people. I miss the hecklers. I remember probably 4 years running, I had a guy from Fedora sitting in the audience of every Linux Sucks to point out everything that I said was not an issue with Fedora, and it was amazing. I missed that heckling so very, very much. One time, a guy from Fedora got into a little argument with the guy from SUSE, and it was great. They're both great. By the way, both of those guys, friends of mine. Now. Anyway, I miss it, so what we're doing this year, we're doing things a little differently because the last two Linux Sucks, the 2020 and 2021 edition, were recorded by myself in a dark room. It was A, sad, and B, kind of dumb. So what I'm doing now is I found a room that's big. So there's a little bit of echo to it. It feels like I'm in a big conference hall sort of thing. And two, I'm recording it next to a bunch of windows pointed out at an area with a playground and a pool where kids are playing and families are laughing. So it's alive. It's a live feeling and live streamed directly to the subscribers of the Lunduke Journal. Hello, all you live stream watchers. So I can't stop. I can't edit. I can't take a break and pause the recording in between. Whatever I do now, that's the show. And that's how it should be. That's how it always was for Linux Sucks. It's live. It's totally live. And to make that point, to make the point of how utterly live it always needs to be, this is what the very first Linux Sucks looked like. This was back in, I think, 2009, and you'll note the big projector screen right there says no input detected. We spent the first 15 minutes, give or take, of the first Linux Sucks ever just trying to get VGA output working to the projector. It was amazing. I'm doing a presentation about all the problems with Linux, and it was all so bad that we couldn't even get the projector working. The people came up and helped me out, and we eventually got it working, and off we went. But holy heavens, it took forever. I got to try not to look at the chat. There's a chat over here. Like I said, we're doing this live. Because even though I'm doing this live, I still can't stop and read a chat. Anyway, so back then, nothing worked, right? Nothing worked. I mean, if you guys were around in the Linux world at the late 90s through the early 2000s, oh my gosh, you were lucky if you got Wi-Fi working. Shoot. Wi-Fi sound sometimes didn't quite work. Getting 3D acceleration, yeah, right. I mean, stuff just didn't work. And then things happened. Bug fixes happened. Investment into the overall ecosystem of Linux, not just the kernel and the drivers around it, but improvements to the desktop environments and improvements to network managers and everything else that kept beefing up how robust and usable and non-breaky Linux was, right? So we had lots of bug fixes, and now here we are in 2022, and Linux has grown up. Linux is an adult now. I mean, Linux stands on its own. It powers the supercomputers of the world. Of the top 100 supercomputers, I believe all 100 of them run Linux. The fastest 100 computers in the world run the same base kernel. Right, different kernel versions, but same base thing. How amazing is that? That's insane. That's nuts. And it doesn't just stop there. I mean, people's phones, Android has Linux inside of it. Chromebooks and Chrome OS, Linux is in there too. Linux is everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's nuts. And it's going to continue to be that way. And it's amazing. But with that means Linux is also corporate, right? It's big. It's wealthy. There's money in Linux. A lot of money. Oodles of money. Skaboodles of money. Ridiculous amounts of money. And that's good and bad. It's all over the place. So then we get to last year. And Linux Sucks 2021 happened. Now, Linux Sucks 2021 was an interesting one because it wasn't a very happy time in Linux land. And the show represented that. It was a depressing show. It was basically the end is near. The slogan of the whole show was literally the end of Linux is nigh. And I presented what I thought was essentially, here is the off-ramp of Linux. Here is Linux heading towards the grave. And you know what? Of all the points I made, and I made a lot of points in the 2021 show that were right. However, I was wrong. Linux wasn't heading for the grave. The end of Linux was not nigh, not by a long shot. The problems still existed, but I was missing a few things. I was missing a part of the broader picture of what really was going to be happening, and we're going to go into that a little bit today because I was wrong a little bit. Yeah. Gotta save face, Lunduke. Gotta save face. No, I was basically half wrong. I was half wrong on the last one, and we're gonna go into why. But before we dive into all of this, I need to make something extremely clear here. We, meaning me and you and probably everyone watching this, we make fun of Linux. We criticize Linux. We ridicule Linux because we love Linux, right? There's really two different types of making fun of something. There's when you make fun of something that you don't like, well, that's just kind of being mean, right? But when you're making fun of something that you love, that's almost a different kind of love. That's just some extra love. It's sort of like when two buddies get together and they give each other a gentle ribbing, but they love each other. That's what we're talking about here. So I'm about to rip into some things rather hard. But it's out of love. And I want to make this very, very clear because there's a lot of love that's about to get thrown at your screen. In fact, there's about 100 slides worth of love we're about to go through in rapid succession. And there's a lot of things in there that really do suck an awful lot. But there's a lot of love coming at it. So first I want to start with this. This is the basic premise that I want to frame everything we're about to look through. And that is that we, as an industry, as a Linux community, as an open source industry, as all of us, all the organizations and the individuals involved, we have, in general, forgotten where we came from. We have forgotten who we are deep down. And to drive that point home, this is the announcement. This is the very first words about Linux ever from Linus himself. Quote, "I'm doing a free operating system, just a hobby. Won't be big and professional like GNU for 386, 486 AT clones. Just a hobby. Won't be big and professional. Free. Fun." Right? Fun. The kind of things you feel passionate about. The kind of things you play with. A hobby, and that has gone away. So let's start with this. As we're thinking about Linux, as we're thinking about where Linux is, where Linux could be going in the future, it helps to define and understand who the king of Linux is, right? To understand since there's so many Linux distributions out there, and I'm talking mostly desktop Linux classical distributions, not Android and Chrome OS, just put those over there for a little while. We're not even going to really talk about Android and Chrome OS because, shoot, for all we know, Google might swoop in and de-Linux all of those tomorrow and turn them into Fuchsia-based operating systems because that's just kind of the weird things that Google does. So let's focus on the classics, right? The classic type of Linux desktop computing. So who's the king? Now, you might recognize this chart. I used this chart back in the 2016 edition of Linux Sucks, and it's all over the map, right? It shows different distributions on a roller coaster of popularity. Now, here's the thing, though. This particular chart, do you know where this comes from? It comes from Distro Watch. What's Distro Watch? Distro Watch is literally a website that measures how popular different pages are for each distribution on distrowatch.com. So on a specific website, it measures how many people are checking out individual distributions. So it doesn't tell you what the market share is. Not at all. All it tells you is how popular, how often an Ubuntu or a Debian or a Fedora or an Arch page is clicked on DistroWatch. The one thing that's nice about that is it helps you see over time how much a certain segment of the Linux population is viewing each individual distribution. And you see, it's crazy. It's a giant, nonstop, psychopathic roller coaster. In general, the top distributions on DistroWatch tend to be either the top or near the top of what seems like the most popular Linux distributions out there. However, we have no real way of knowing what the most popular distribution is. There is no way to know. There's no central repository. There's no consistent way that distributions actually track how popular they are. One distribution will track how many times their ISOs are downloaded. Another will track how many unique IPs hit their repository. There's issues with both of those systems. Others will track how many update packages are downloaded. Others actually have tracking systems that they put in place. But no distribution uses the same exact format. So when you compare from one distribution to the next, you're comparing apples to turnips. There's no comparison. We have no idea. And that's assuming that these individual distributions are actually even releasing any numbers in any transparent and verifiable way, which 99% of them ain't. So there is no possible way outside of what's your gut feeling to know what the king of distributions is. However, there is one distribution maker that views themselves as the king, and that is Canonical with Ubuntu. And since they view themselves as the king, because they publish these white papers all the time, why Canonical and Ubuntu are the number one Linux distribution in all of the universe. They do this stuff all the time. So they clearly think that they're the king. Okay, king. I want to make fun of you for a little bit because I've got a few bones to pick with you. And to start with, we are not going to take the easy stuff. I'm not going to make fun of the absolutely ridiculous color scheme of Ubuntu. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to go there. It's too easy. I've done it before. I would, however, like to take issue with the fact that you feel Ubuntu and Canonical as though you are not just the center that you feel you are the center of the universe, right? The Canonical really does. It feels like it is the center of the whole Linux universe. It portrays that image, and it acts as such. And I find that terribly, terribly annoying. Now, what picture you have on the screen right now, this is something that just happened the other day. That is an actual picture of the center of the Milky Way galaxy. It just so happens that it looks exactly like the Ubuntu logo. Which, now here's the thing, that's a black hole. What that means is that Linux sucks, specifically Ubuntu sucks so hard that we have mistaken it for a black hole. Either that or it sucks so hard it has sucked in enough matter to collapse in on itself and create a black hole. One or the other, we're still trying to figure all that sort of thing out. But here's the big thing that bothers me about Ubuntu and Canonical and their general approach right now. It is that they create something and then they say that is the only way, right? And they constantly do this. You'll use Snappy and you'll be happy. There's no, that rhymed and I didn't even realize it rhymed. There's no options here. Canonical, the head of Canonical, Mark Shuttleworth, recently came out and stated, we don't even want to support Flatpak. We don't want people doing Flatpaks. And on top of that, the most recent release, the long-term support release of Ubuntu that just came out, broke app images. So they're like, so Canonical's like, you know what? We know nobody likes Snappy, but like 4 people do. But we're going to make that the default, move more things into Snappy, even though it makes it really hard to do things like print, copy and paste to the clipboard, and access files and download files using web browsers, and makes just generally using things like Firefox and all those sorts of web browsers just absolutely a mess because you can't really install extensions because they're all sandboxed weird and the entire user experience is absolute garbage. Where was I? Oh, yeah. And then they went and said, okay, but we don't want you using Flatpak. We're not going to include it out of the box. And we're going to intentionally, it seems like to me, break app images, which is another mechanism for getting applications onto your system. So they're reducing the number of ways to get software onto your system while forcing people to use something that is just an annoying thing to use. And that is just generally a good example of the whole we're Ubuntu, we are the center of the universe, and we're a black hole where no light escapes. The good news with that is that Canonical always kills things off. Always. If Canonical makes something, if Ubuntu has an Ubuntu homegrown solution for anything, it lasts for a couple of years, everyone hates it, and then it kills it. Unity, Upstart, Mir, Ubuntu Touch. Do you guys remember Ubuntu Touch? They were going to have their own phone, and they did a whole thing about it. Dead. Ubuntu for Android. That was a whole different thing than their Ubuntu Touch system. It was like this thing where they were going to bootstrap on Android phones. Ubuntu for TV. They were going to have Ubuntu on TVs. That was a whole thing. They made a big deal about that for a while. Your hopes and dreams, they killed those too. And then, of course, Snap, well, that's bound to be axed. I mean, they've never not axed something. I don't know why they wouldn't axe Snappy. They're bound to do it, right? Especially in face of the rapidly declining market share. That orange bar in the middle over time is Ubuntu. And this is used for gamers, right? This is measuring the Proton database stuff, so it's hardcore gamers. So this is the amount of hardcore gamers that are currently using Ubuntu over time. And you see, when it started, well, Ubuntu was pretty darn popular. And then now it's like in 3rd, about to be 4th, maybe 5th place by the time this debuts to the public, right? So, I mean, it continues to do that. And it's just... the people are getting annoyed with Canonical and annoyed with Ubuntu and finding other places to go. They're moving to Arch. They're moving back to just base Debian, which, just to make sure this is 100% crystal clear, Ubuntu is just Debian with lots of things people don't want tacked onto it. That's just the way it is. I mean, when Ubuntu started, it was proud of that. It advertised that. It was Debian polished up. And that's what Ubuntu was. It was great, but they forgot what made them great. They forgot their roots. So now they don't even really talk about how they're based on Debian anymore, even though they still are. They've always been based on Debian. And that just keeps going. They forget where they came from. They forget why people flocked to them in the first place, despite their ridiculous orange color scheme. Now, let's move away from Canonical for a minute, because we could sit here and rant about Ubuntu and Canonical all day, but they are far from the only problem. In fact, they are definitely not the biggest problem. So let's dive into some of the other things going on right now in the Linux world that are kind of driving me bonkers. Specifically, the Linux Foundation itself. I'm not going to dive into this too far and deep. I'm going to touch on this from a high level. But the Linux Foundation in 2021 brought in $177 million. A big chunk of that came from Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and other extremely big tech mega corporations and multinational conglomerates that donated to the project, and in exchange for that, got voting seats on the Linux Foundation Board of Directors. So the foundation that controls Linux sold control to companies like Microsoft and Facebook. Yeah. So now here's the thing. Here's the thing that the reason that bugs me a little bit. They sold, it's not, you can't sell all of Linux, right? Because Linux is not just open source, it's GPL, it's free software, right? If I and you and a bunch of other people are like, you know what, we don't like what Linux Foundation's doing. well, we can fork it and go our own way. We can do that. We absolutely can do that. Because the trademarks are held and theoretically enforced by the Linux Foundation, we might have to change the name of it. But that's fine. But the giant ground swelling of support that's behind Linux, that's really controlled by the Linux Foundation. They employ the individuals who maintain it, including Linus himself, and the organization themselves are funded in very large part with lots and lots of money by Microsoft and Facebook and whatnot. But Microsoft, I'm not 100% an anti-Microsoft guy, right? Microsoft's done some okay things. They've got some okay people that have worked there in the past. But get your Microsoft out of my Linux. You know, I'm a big fan of pineapples. But I don't put pineapples in my chocolate milk. Get your friggin' pineapples out of my chocolate milk. In this example, chocolate milk is Linux. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. And so we have an issue right now where Microsoft, among other companies, have extraordinary amounts of control over not just Linux, but the entire open source world. They donate to the open source initiative and everything else, and they own and control GitHub. This really doesn't get talked about enough. The vast majority of open source projects in a singular place are hosted on GitHub. I cover different open source projects every single day for the Lunduke Journal. And if not every day, at least every other day, I am putting up links to a GitHub project page for some cool project. And those projects are awesome. And those are all being hosted by Microsoft. And not just hosted by Microsoft on a closed source platform, because GitHub is closed source. So the entire open source world is on a closed source infrastructure. It's ridiculous. That is controlled by Microsoft, whose CEO once said that Linux itself is cancer. And Microsoft, their CEO at that time, Steve Ballmer, who was the CEO, got into such a rant session one time where he was raving about how much he hated Linux and Linus that spit was flying out of his mouth and covered my face and glasses in it. That's not even a joke. That's an actual story. That's ridiculous. And yet the whole open source world rests on GitHub. Or at least a pretty big chunk of it. That's insane to me. That's absolutely crazy. Like if you were sitting around with a bunch of open source nerds back in the early 90s, they're like, it'd be great. We got a kernel, Linus, that guy started a kernel. Nothing professional, just a hobby, but we'll build on that kernel. But you know what? We also want a place to host all of these extra projects we're building. What do we do? Well, I think we should go to Microsoft. And we should have them say, hey, Microsoft, could you take some of our open source stuff and could you just completely ruin the idea behind it and build a giant closed source infrastructure on it, and then we'll use that to build our open source future? No one from the 70s, 80s, 90s would have liked that idea. They would have revolted against that idea. Tables would have been flipped over in the temple. Things would have been lit on fire. The pitchforks and torches would have been grabbed, and that would have been that. The neckbeards would have been furious. And yet, here we are. Back to Linux Foundation for a moment. Remember how I said they make $177 million? This is a chart that they released for their annual report last year. Note the amount for Linux kernel support is 3%. Yeah, where does the rest of that money go? The rest of that money goes to a wide variety of projects throughout the Linux Foundation. It's difficult to know exactly where the money goes because they're oddly not that transparent. Some of it goes to efforts to police the words people use in source code. That's not a joke. We're not talking about swearing or something like that, but just using particular types of words in source code. They also have a program where they try and develop and push people to use vaccine passport systems and a wide variety of other things. But they also have been getting into the NFT game. Seriously. Recently, the Linux Foundation has been spending some of their hard-earned capital from selling their board seats to Microsoft by producing white papers and videos talking about NFTs and cryptocurrencies. Now, I want to point this out. This little tweet right here is not real. Before anyone decides to yell at me about this is not real. Jim Zemlin spitballing there about NFTs. That's not a real tweet. That's just something I put together to make fun of them because what they're doing is ridiculous. Now, here's the thing. I have nothing against NFTs. I have nothing for NFTs. I am like NFT ambivalent. I think you're kind of dumb, but whatever. I mean, there's a lot of software and a lot of ideas and tech out there that I don't use or that I've used once or twice. Like I played around with NFTs a little bit, but then I stopped because I didn't really care for it all that much. But whatever, right? NFTs, fine. Like NFTs, don't like NFTs. I don't care. But why would the Linux Foundation get into NFTs? Why would the Linux Foundation get into policing the language of source code? Well, I guess that makes a little bit more sense because there's source code involved in Linux, but just the same, why? And why would the Linux Foundation get into vaccine passport systems? Again, nothing not even saying whether you like vaccine passport systems. Why would the Linux Foundation be involved? Why would they do that? Rinky's raggy? I don't know. It's really, really weird. I would also like to point out that Richard Stallman is not on Twitter and did not tweet that I'd just like to interject for a moment. What you're referring to as NFT is in fact GNU/NFT, or as I've recently taken to calling it GNU plus NFT. He did not tweet that. That's not a thing that happened. That's not real. But if it did, I would be very happy. Let's detour for a moment. Detour. I gotta do this detour because, yeah, I just have to do it. Let's talk about Linux marketing for a second. Because when we're talking about how we've sort of lost our way, for those of us who have been around in the Linux world in the 90s and early 2000s, you remember a lot of the weird Linux marketing that occurred. And some of it was bizarre, but fun. Like this one. This was from IBM, actually. It was called The Kid. And they had this whole advertising campaign. It was starting with one big, long commercial, and then they chopped it up into different commercials with lots of celebrities. There's Penny Marshall, but lots of celebrities were involved with it. They did a Super Bowl ad and everything, and it was creepy. There was this little white-haired kid in a white room, and this narrator, they're like, "That's Linux. He's learning." And it was this really creepy thing, but it was kind of cool just the same. And I liked that, right? And again, that was IBM. I'm not like, oh, we need to do whatever IBM does, but it was a kind of a cool commercial. And IBM actually did quite a few cool things in Linux marketing. I'm not saying they did things that should have been done, but they did cool things, right? So like this picture is from the streets of San Francisco. This was called Peace, Love, Linux, right? And you see the little symbols there, little tucks and hearts and peace signs and all that. Peace, Love, Linux. And what they did is they hired people to go all over the city of San Francisco and vandalize the city with Peace, Love, Linux. All over the city, the sidewalks, all sorts of things. So there's tons of pictures out there if you look for this campaign of these little logos all over the city of San Francisco. Well, the mayor of San Francisco just got mad. They were upset. In the end, they ended up fining IBM $100,000 to try and clean Peace, Love, Linux off of the streets of San Francisco. And some of it was so bad that they couldn't clean it off because they ended up, like, the little images got etched into, like, walls and sidewalks and everything and permanently, like, vandalized and, like, broke things. And it was crazy, right? Crazy. Weird, but kind of fun just the same. Like, it was a wild time, right? And then there's stuff like this. I wrote this one. Sousa and other people did some really cool stuff like this. We did a lot of parody music videos. This was called Uptime Funk and all that sort of thing. We had fun, right? There was fun, and then something happened a couple of years ago. I want to pinpoint it down to about 3 years ago, 2 to 3 years ago. There was this shift in Linux marketing, and we went from this. And this is the same company, mind you. This is Sousa marketing quite a couple years back, thanks to me. And then it became this. I apologize. I apologize, everybody. So this is part of SUSE's marketing for Linux. You're like, well, what is this? How is this marketing? Well, let me help you. Let's pan to quadrant 2 and enhance. Wait. Enhance! I'm really, really sorry, but this is actual Linux marketing nowadays. I'm sorry. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. SUSE put their logo on, and guys took us. Why are we looking at this? Why is this happening to us right now? All of you, I'm sorry. Why can't I switch away? Why don't I switch away? You know what? Let me just move to the next slide. Oh my gosh, it's there. It's everywhere. Everywhere you look is that guy's took us with SUSE links on it. Here's the thing. In the last couple of years, the Linux marketing has taken this weird just drive off a cliff. And it's not just SUSE that's done it. If you look at the marketing for Red Hat and Canonical and HPE and Red Hat and IBM and all of it, it's not good. It's real not good. It's like they forgot how to be cool, and like they forgot what Linux was in the first place. I mean, apparently that's Linux. I don't know, but here's the thing. This provides us with a golden opportunity to make fun of SUSE for a moment, because right now SUSE is one of the most infinitely fun companies in the Linux space to make fun of. And I'm not saying the only one. Obviously, we've spent a great deal of time making fun of Canonical here as well. But I would like to do two particular things to make fun of SUSE, who, I should point out, is the oldest Linux company on planet Earth, the longest running. They started before Red Hat became a thing, right? Like, they've been going for a long time. I was at 92 when that SUSE was founded. It was a long time ago. I would like to point out two things that SUSE has done, the oldest Linux company in the world, as part of their advertising, marketing, branding efforts over the last year or so, that are so absolutely ridiculous that, and I've brought these up before to people, but never in a Linux Sucks, so here we go, rock and roll. The first, I bring you back to last summer, to July of 2021, and well, there's this award system happening from ERP Today. ERP Today is this publication. I think they're over in the UK. I can't remember. Anyway, they're having this award ceremony, and they're sponsored by SUSE. And SUSE was really proud to sponsor. And what sponsoring here means is most likely that SUSE gave ERP Today some sum of money. Usually it's so many thousands of dollars or whatnot. And they're sponsoring an award program. So who wins an award from ERP Today? Well, SUSE won the award from ERP Today, the award that they sponsored. What award did they win? Wait, hold on. Did they win the COVID-19 Hero Award? So SUSE bought themselves an award that was a COVID-19 Hero Award. Right about now, you might be asking yourself, did SUSE invent COVID-19? I don't think so. Did SUSE destroy COVID-19? I don't think so. Did SUSE do anything related to COVID-19 at all that any of us are aware of? I don't think so. They make Linux. I don't really know, but they're a COVID-19 hero. Why are they a COVID-19 hero? Because they paid a company to tell them they were a COVID-19 hero. This is basically the equivalent of going down to a hobby shop and buying yourself a bowling trophy, even though you've never bowled in your life. And I absolutely love that they were proud to announce all of that. And that's not the first or only time that SUSE buys themselves awards. They do this regularly. They buy themselves awards all the time. Here's another example. There's a Women in IT award, right? So Women in IT award, cool. I like women. I like information technologies. Let's give out some awards. Cool. So at the Women in IT awards, they were sponsored in part by SUSE. SUSE paid the Women in IT awards some unknown amount of money and sponsored them. Cool. So who won the big award from them? Well, SUSE did. SUSE's CEO wins the big Women in IT award, which means that SUSE bought a Woman of the Year award for their CEO. This is This is Linux marketing now. This is what Linux marketing has become. We've gone from really cool, like weird videos of kids in server rooms with like celebrities talking to them and weird guerrilla campaigns where they end up spray painting Linux on things and cool music videos to buying yourself COVID-19 hero awards and such. But this Woman of the Year award, this really stuck with me because it is essentially a plot from an episode of The Office. I believe there was a plot from the episode of The Office, and I could be remembering this wrong, where the boss, Michael, buys himself a World's Best Boss coffee cup and has the employees give it to him, and then he acts honored. That's exactly what happened here. Literally, the advertising of a Linux company is an episode of The Office. Moving on. So let's talk about things that suck. Let's go back to Linux and things that suck, because holy heavens. Let's talk about Electron briefly. I've been making fun of Electron for, ever, since Electron became Electron. The ability to have web applications and turn them into desktop applications is quite possibly the thing I like the least in the whole universe. And I'm not a big fan of it. How I feel about it is best summed up in this knock knock joke. Knock knock, of course, you will say, who's there? Okay, move to the next slide. Wait. Okay, move to the next slide. Wait a moment. Next slide. An Electron application. I do not enjoy having all of my applications be interpreted. I mean, running some interpreted scripts in Python and whatnot, totally fine. Bash scripts, great, yes, great. But having giant, complex graphical applications wrapped up inside of a Web 4.0 wrapper, I can't. I can't even. And I don't use the phrase I can't even lightly or very often, but I can't even. Please no. We need more native stuff, please. Please stop making Electron applications. Please stop having people use Electron applications, especially if they're things that require people to chat and use them all day long. Please just make a native application. Use some sort of web services or something to communicate in the back end, and just make a native application that looks like the rest of my system and operates and performs quickly. Please just do that for me. Not web applications. Please, I'm asking for little things in life. Also, okay, this one's not 100% serious, but a little bit serious. We need a killer robot. We don't have one right now, not that I'm aware of, or a cyborg or an android or something. We need something robotic that's like gonna murder people. And the point I'm making here is this. This is RoboCop. And a lot of you right now are going, what the heck are you talking about, Lunduke? This is RoboCop, okay? RoboCop is run on DOS. Note the config.sys and command.com going on there. That's DOS, right? RoboCop is powered by DOS. So DOS has an awesome killer robot android cyborg dude. Okay, fair enough. But Terminator, well, Terminator, as it happens, is all in the Apple ecosystem. This is Terminator 3. Note that they have QuickTime Player, the software update and date and time, control strip. This is all classic Mac. This is a classic Mac. This is like Mac OS 8, Mac OS 9. That's what's going on right here. That's what powers the more recent Terminators. Now, however, the first Terminator, you know what was powering that? That was powered by an Apple II. It was 6502 assembly code right there. This is real. That is powering that. Are any of these running Linux? No, they're not. And we need a killer robot powering Linux. And if someone can find one for me, I would really appreciate it. If I've missed it, my apologies to the killer robot community of the world, because we need more killer robots running Linux. Now, however, there are some bright spots in all of this. In the Linux world, there's bright things. There's good things. There's things to be loving and excited and happy about. For instance, no one likes snap packaging, right? So it doesn't matter that Canonical really wants you to use it, beyond just the fact that they're going to cancel it within a year or two anyway. None of us like it, so it's going to go away. No big deal. Also, desktop effects are making a comeback. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but like the old Compiz barrel 3D spinning desktop cubes, and when you close a cube, it burns and lights on fire, and the windows wobble when you move them around. It's making a comeback, man. It's making a comeback under GNOME and KDE and all of it. It's happening. Thank heavens, too, because it's just so much fun. There's so many little weird funky projects that, in my opinion, embody the spirit of what makes Linux amazing happening right now. And they're not happening at the big companies. They're happening in the little mom and pop shops, the small companies, the little organizations, and the individuals toiling away by themselves. And this is, in my opinion, best exemplified by the hardware that's happening out there in the Linux world right now. There is some truly amazing stuff happening in the Linux hardware world that it just makes me smile. Some of these that we're about to go through, I'm just going to show you a couple of these, are just mind-blowingly cool. Let's start with the Steam Deck. Okay, the Steam Deck is not some little company. That's put together by Valve, but a lot of people are crazy about it and like feel the need to tell everyone that they have a Steam Deck constantly. They're like the new Arch users, which is funny because the Steam Deck actually runs Arch, but they tell people constantly, I've got a Steam Deck. Yes, I know you've got a Steam Deck, and it does seem very, very cool, and it runs Arch, and I like that very much. However, cooler than that, this guy. It's the dev term. Oh, it's so cool. It's a little slab computer. It's like the old TRS-80 Model 100. I've talked about it so many times. But there it is. There's a picture of it. There's a picture of it running CD, the common desktop environment. Oh, baby. So cute. I love it so much. It's a little thing, right? That's not a full-size keyboard. It's a little thing. Here's another picture of it. Here's what's cool about this one. The screen's divided in half in this one. On the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, you've got emulators. On the right is a Macintosh emulator. On the left, you've got a little, I think it's DOSBox or something like that, running Windows 3.1. So you've got old Mac Classic, like Mac System 7 or something on right, and then Windows 3.1 on the left, running on a tiny little Linux-powered slab computer. Oh, see, now that's cool. That's cool. That right there. That's Linux, right? That's Linux to me, man. And they've got a RISC-V version of it. I never know if I should say RISC-V or RISC-V. I know it's RISC-V, but part of me wants to say RISC-V as well. Whatever, it's cool. Open hardware CPUs powering a little slab computer powered by Linux. See, now that's cool. More of this, yes, please. Or how about this guy? I think they called this the Penkesu. One guy came up with this, published the specs for how to build this little itty-bitty palm top, obviously running Linux with this crazy ultra-wide screen and this cute little mechanical keyboard, and published the 3D files for it as open source, so you can grab it, again, from GitHub. I believe it's on GitHub, so it's hosted on a closed-source Microsoft platform. That needs to change. But the piece of hardware, isn't that the cutest little thing? I mean, who doesn't want to carry that around in their like coat pocket or something? It's super, super cool. And the same guy who created that created this one. A round TFT screen with a mechanical keyboard. It looks like someone went back to the 1960s, asked like a designer, what's a really funky computer going to look like in the year 2000? And they come up with this and then just come back home and build it. I want this. I want one of these on the counter of every room in my house. Is it weird to have a round screen? Yes, but also awesome. And side note, it's using right here for the screenshot, Cool Retro Term, which if you have never tried that, please, for the heavens, go try Cool Retro Term. It just literally emulates using a CRT display, but on your LCD. So you can modify it to be different kinds of, different colors of amber and green, phosphorus. It's super cool. Things like that. Little tiny projects, so super cool. Or this one. This is the Pocket. The Pocket. Check that one out. It is a modular computer. Here, I think I've got a shot. Yeah, here we go. It's a modular computer. It's basically a little snap-tight computer. You can pull off pieces and parts and snap it together for a modular handheld computer. You could use it as a thermostat or a little handheld PDA, or I think they've got it right there as a soap dispenser. I'm not sure what's happening, but it runs Linux and I want it. Or there's like the Pine phone. The Pine phone. It's super cheap, ARM-powered, Linux-powered phone. Heck yes! And they've got the Pine Note, which is really cool. Also from the Pine 64 people, which is an e-ink display with a little touch screen and everything like that, running Linux. That is so cool. That is so incredibly cool. That is the embodiment. Are a lot of those big professional projects? No. No, they're not. They're cool projects. They're projects that make you smile. They're projects that make your head turn and go, "Ooh, what is that?" Like that picture with the guy walking with the lady, and then he's like, "Ooh," then the other lady, right? It's like that, except the hardware. And here's some more cool stuff. Here's a bunch of like software projects that are just ridiculously awesome. Like, how'd that get in there? I don't know. Maybe because it's Linux. Yeah, that right there is Linux. You can make Linux look exactly like that. Why would you make Linux look like that? Because it's fun to do so. This is also Linux. Yes, it is, and that's awesome. Is that my favorite design ever? No. Do I hate the Windows XP interface with every fiber of my being? Yes. But I still delight that people made it happen, that they made Linux look exactly like that. Because someone sat down and said, I love Linux so much. I want to make it look like XP. I want it to look like a Fisher-Price toy, darn it. Or here's it is looking like an Amiga. Or here's it looking like Mac OS 9 or Mac OS 8 or something. It's crazy. And if you follow those instructions on your screen, you can make your terminal look like a DOS prompt. That's right. So if you hop on in to your terminal, type all that out, go ahead and pause the video and type all that out. Your terminal looks like a DOS prompt. Why? Because we can. Because it's not anything professional. It's just a hobby, and it's so much fun to do this random weird stuff. Now this right here, this is a screenshot to remind me. This is a little graphic to remind me to talk about the fact that over on the Windows side of things, they're not doing anything fun like this. They're just not. I mean, not Microsoft, not Apple. I mean, they're out there producing their operating system, but it's not exciting. It's not interesting. It's not all that stuff that we've been talking about. It's not that customizability. It's not that utter freedom of expression and experimentation that leads to people to make their whole operating systems look like completely different operating systems, to build computers with round screens in them, because why not? It needs to happen more. Oh, this is New Shell. What's New Shell? Look it up. NU Shell. It's amazing. It's a not graphical. It's all text-based, but it's a text UI, a TUI interface replacement for your shell. So instead of running bash, you run New Shell. Combine that with running the cool retro term to give you the old school display, and you've basically got nerd nirvana right there. There's so many great like system monitoring tools and whatnot that just make your systems look like the coolest thing to ever be invented from 1991. And that's amazing. Oh, it's just amazing. Or here, this person created a pseudo 3D gaming engine entirely in Bash. Yeah, not in C, in Bash scripting. So you can build like a pseudo 3D gaming engine like a lot of the old like Dungeons and Dragons games and whatnot. It's amazing. It's super amazing. It's all in Bash. And when if you go look up the code for that, it's called pseudo 3D Bash. It is crazy looking, and it's so cool. It's not professional. It's just a hobby. Oh, and this thing that's called Monotty. Monotty, Monotty. It is incredible. That's all ANSI style text. That's not a graphical window manager. It means you can run this as your little graphical shell. Think of this like a terminal multiplexer, right? Which there's like GNU Screen or whatnot. Except it's all these little windows and running applications inside of them are movable. And it looks so cool. So you can run this over an SSH session. incredibly cool. The number of cool things in the Linux world are manifest and from here to eternity, and none of them, I'm telling you, like none of them are coming from the big companies right now. Also, another cool thing that's happening in the Linux world right now, we use a lot less Perl than we used to. So we got that going for us because Perl is literally the worst thing ever. In terms of computer, Perl and regular expressions need to be set on fire in like a Viking funeral, because there was a time in the Linux world when everything was Perl. Like you'd have, email servers and mailing list managers and scripts that, initialize desktop environment. It was all written in Perl. It was not editable. It was not readable. It was not pleasant. You instantly got migraines and your eyes began to bleed as soon as you looked at them. And that's going away. Everyone seems to have decided that, yes, indeed, Perl is the worst thing ever. And I think it couldn't be a more exciting time to be alive than when Perl stops getting used entirely. It is wonderful. Now, that said, we have traded our dependence on Perl for something sneaky and insidious. And I'm talking about Rust. Now, I'm not going to say anything bad about the Rust programming language, because if I do that, I will be murdered in my sleep. However, if you ever, and try this on your own social media or whatever, or go into a room filled with programmers and just say, hey, that's C++. That's a pretty good programming language. Instantly, the Rust developers will descend upon you. They will crash in through the skylights, all Mission Impossible type, with their ropes and zip lines, and they'll be like, "We found him, sir. He said something nice about C++." And then they will begin to tell you about their Lord and Savior Rust. Nothing against Rust, but it's getting a bit intense out there. Rust people need to settle the heck down, because if we start rewriting everything in Rust, I feel like doom will fast approach, and I'm not sure why. So here's the thing. We clearly have some things that are wrong in the Linux world, and we clearly have a lot of things that's right in the Linux world. So how do we fix the things that are wrong and enhance those things that are right? So let's talk exactly about things we can do right now to make that bad stuff go away and make the good stuff better. All right, so let's talk about this. Number one, we need to get back to our roots. And I mean in a real way. And I mean that literally. This right here is a picture of boot-root. Linux version 0.12. A lot of people don't realize this. So it used to be that when the first Linux distributions were the boot-root distributions. And they're called boot-root because one floppy disk was your boot disk and one floppy disk was your root disk, right? So you'd put in your boot floppy, swap it out, and then you'd have your root floppy. That would be your root file system. And this is how things were. Now, I'm not saying we need to go back to having two floppy disks. Maybe we should, just for fun. But no. We don't have to go back to having two floppy disks, but we need to understand where we came from. So much of what's happening now is being driven because people have forgotten, or some of them never knew in the first place, where we came from. They forgot this. A free operating system, just a hobby, won't be big and professional like GNU. I mean, that's a little bit of a joke right there. Yeah. Oh, Herd. You mean that big professional operating system known as Herd? Put that aside for a moment. Just ignore that. We can have GNU/Herd sucks a different time. However, that's too easy. That's just mean. However, but we've forgotten this. We have forgotten this. You guys remember this? Anyone know what this is? This right there is Slackware 1.01. It was first hosted at Oregon State University. People would go grab it from their FTP servers. It was great. After a while, after it beefed up a little bit, it was able to be self-hosted as well, like the download servers and whatnot. But this is what Slackware 1.01 looked like. This was roughly 7,000 years ago. We only know this because of the cave paintings that we've discovered. But people have forgotten these things. And this right here, first issue of Linux Journal magazine. That's what it was. Linux versus Windows NT and OS 2. The Linux code freeze as they headed towards Linux 1.0. It was an exciting time. We've lost a lot of those exciting times. And a lot of people will be like, no, there's still exciting times. And there are. You're right. There are exciting times happening. But we've lost a lot of them. And I want them back. And I'm making them come back, darn it. I'm demanding they come back. And I think we all should demand they come back. And another thing that we have gotten away from is the GNU side of things. Now, I'm not a purist when it comes to free software, nor am I a purist when it comes to open source software. I'm willing to run closed source software and everything else. However, over the last couple of years, a renewed effort has emerged to attack this, the GNU side of things, to attack the founders of the projects, to attack the ideals of the projects, to attack the people who do believe in it so much that they're purists about it. And I don't think that that's cool. I just don't. I don't think we need to harp on people like Stallman might do if they happen to run some closed source software or some non-GPL'd software. I don't think we need to. We're having fun here, right? We're having a good time. We don't need to start yelling at each other about licensing whatnots. We just don't need to do that. However, we also don't want to downplay the amazing impact that this has had on not just the industry, but more specifically our hobby of Linux, of computing, of computers as a hobby. Computers as a hobby. That was a thing. Let's bring it back. Number two. We need to stop pretending like Linux is rock solid. And a lot of you were like, whoa, shots fired. Holy heavens, Lunduke. Linux, no, Linux is rock solid. No, it's not. It's really not. I love Linux. I use Linux every day. I'm recording on this on Linux right now. I put all these slides together on Linux. All the original graphics and whatnot you see on here was all produced on Linux. I love Linux. I love it. It's not that rock solid. Do you guys remember the Backspace Bug? This is a fun one to remind people of. There was a bug where if you got to a grub screen, you hit backspace 28 times specifically. Just hit backspace 1, 2, 3, 4 to 28. Boom, logged in. So, I mean, basically that's the equivalent of having no security at all. Bugs like that come up actually kind of regularly. That's one of the funniest ones because it doesn't require any special skills to use. You can literally describe someone how to hack into any Linux system that before it got patched. So you could just say, hit backspace 28 times. What? What if I lose count? Just hit it a couple more times. Just keep hitting backspace. Just hit backspace until you're logged in, right? That sort of thing happens fairly regularly. Now, are other operating systems, do they have bugs like this? Oh, yeah. There's been so many weird bugs in Windows and Mac and all sorts of them. Even the Unix side of things is riddled with funky security bugs. But we've kind of convinced ourselves of that Linux is this crazy, mature, impenetrable fortress. You can't get viruses and Trojans. Windows has the virus. No. We got them all, dog. And the more popular we get, the more exploits get found, the more viruses get developed, the more Trojans get created. And there's no way around that. If there's popularity and there's money to be made in hacking our systems, and there is, because again, we just talked about how astoundingly corporate Linux has become, these sorts of things will happen. Now, that said, even when there's bugs, Linux is kind of amazing, and it runs, and it's kind of awesome. Okay. Now, we need to remember also how quirky we are. How astoundingly weird and bizarre and quirky that we all are. Because we are. We are a weird, quirky group of people. Linux is weird and quirky. The systems that run on top of Linux, the different distributions and the desktop environments and the applications and the very strange things that get built for Linux are bizarre. And we as a people, and when I say we as a people, I mean computer enthusiasts and hobbyists. We're so quirky that this is a list of just some of the code names for different Linux kernel releases. I'm going to read a few of these out loud because they deserve to be read out loud, because these are the kind of things that need to happen more in life. These are real releases of the Linux kernel. Again, not big and professional. Greased Weasel, Linux 95, Greased Turkey. There's a lot of greasy animals in this. Avast, a bilge rat, Homicidal Dwarf Hamster, Holy Dancing Manatees Batman, Pink Farting Weasel, lots of weasels. Funky Weasel is jiggy with it. Erotic Pickled Herring, Sheep on Meth, Herder, I'm a sheep. One of my favorites, Linux 311, Linux for Workgroups. That's just fantastic. Blurry Fish Butt, Charred Weasel, Psychotic Stone Sheep, Don't Use. That's a great one. There's just so many of them. And here's the thing. We lose sight of it. They get all these, new Linux kernel releases come out, and they have all these new enterprisey features, and all these big companies like IBM, which now owns Red Hat, and Canonical and SUSE, base their enterprise cloud offerings with their B2B services and their high uptime container platforms and whatnot. They are all built on top of a platform called Blurry Fish Butt, and that's cool. Also, you know what? We got people out there who tell everyone every day what distro they run. Keep doing that. Don't stop. Am I and other people going to make fun of you for saying, by the way, I use Arch? Yes, but in a loving way. Remember in the beginning when we talked about how when you make fun of someone and you love them and you love the thing you're making fun of, that's also a form of it's a form of love. It's a form of embracing and affection for them. That's the case here. Yes, Arch users, you tell everyone you use Arch. You do it. You let your Arch flag fly. And everyone else who uses Gentoo and everything else, do it. Absolutely do it. Tell them. I will support you on that. You do something weird with Linux, tell the world 1,000,000 times, always. And then 4, and I think this is possibly the most important thing that we can do right now, is we need to stop caring about the big Linux companies because they kind of suck. I'm telling you straight up, they kind of suck. And I'm not going to name them right now because we've already named them a bunch. But they've steered us in a direction where they've sold us to companies that hate us. They have. They've focused on the things we don't want. It's true. And they've pushed an agenda that we don't want either. And when I say agenda, I'm talking tech, man. I'm not talking politics. I'm talking tech agenda. I don't want to use the package manager you want to use, dude. No one does. Take your package manager and go home. I want to use apt or zipper or yum or app image or flatpak. I don't need no snappiness, right? And it's not just that. But that's a good example of it. And these big tech companies, man, you can tell. It used to be that Red Hat focused on, you could buy boxes of Red Hat Linux. It was a desktop. It was for workstations. You could buy boxes of SUSE Linux Desktop. You can't anymore. Those don't really happen anymore. They don't focus on those things anymore. In fact, for a lot of things, a lot of times you'll find companies, the big Linux companies, will issue press releases that won't even use the word Linux in them. Who are they doing this for? They're not in the business of helping us out. They're not for us anymore. They've changed. And it's time that we just simply stop caring about them, that we stop looking to them for leadership. We need to be looking to our own, to the hobbyists, to the people making round-screened, weird little 1960s terminals, and the people building strange window managers that are entirely in a shell. We need to be looking to them. They're the people doing the stuff that makes us smile, that makes us happy. And if we can do all of that, if we can ignore all of the stuff that comes out of the big tech of Linux, we might, just maybe, be able to make Linux suck a little bit less. That's my personal feelings on the matter. And before we go today, I would like to say this. Jokes, specifically jokes about computers, are far, far more important than big tech. And when I say big tech, I include all those big Linux tech companies that we just talked about. So with that in mind, here's a random sampling, and I do mean really pretty random, of random Linuxy or computery or general IT nerd jokes that I've published over the recent times. And I'm just going to tell you some of them. Hey, did you know that the computer mouse was created for the very specific purpose of harming people with disabilities? Oh, you mean Vim users? Yeah, I mean Vim users. I find that funny. I installed Linux on my old laptop yesterday. Runs like 10 times faster now. It's like magic. It's not magic. It's pseudoscience. Is that cheesy? Yes, it's cheesy and you like it. Why did the non-binary person make such a bad computer programmer? He just couldn't figure out Booleans. Am I going to get yelled at? Probably. Why? I don't know, because jokes. I like jokes. I don't know. I get yelled at for jokes. It's okay, though. It's okay. I like you. Whoever, I want to be this very, very clear. Whoever you are, I like you. So, yeah, yell at me if you want. Also, I just find this weird that Linux users are some of the only people in the world that can go hop on Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo or whatever search engine you're using and type the phrase, how to kill a child. And it's not anything creepy or weird. I think that's interesting, right? Hey, what did the sysadmin do when hackers from Mexico were breaking into his servers? He took anxiety medication for Hispanic attacks. I just find that one funny. All right. One last bit. We're going to go through Lunduke's guide to choosing a Linux distro. Please feel free to follow along with me at home. To start with, what type of operating system are you used to? Choose Windows, Mac, or Linux. Okay. Now let's move on. Now, do you prefer to use the mouse or the keyboard? Mouse or keyboard, those are your options. Okay. Choose that. Keep that in mind, okay? Do you prefer text or graphical interfaces? Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, now put that in your mind. I'm keeping track of mine as I go along here. Okay. And then just don't use Gentoo. Anything but Gentoo is fine. That's the word on the street. Thank you everyone for hanging out. This has been Linux Sucks 2022. A few of the things are going to get me yelled at, but that's okay. I hope everyone had a good time. I hope that you get to use Linux in your life in a way that makes you genuinely happy, that brings you joy, that makes you giggle, that makes you think, oh, I just did something cool, and it's so cool you want to show somebody, right? And then the next time you're reading an article or hearing about some announcement from some big Linux company, and it's something about some B2B server platform for high uptime containerized availability on the blockchain, just tune it out. And then go find something extremely nerdy to geek out about that's probably made by a little tiny company or just one dude or one lady who's come up with something funky. And if you can't find anything, I hope that you have the interest of making it yourself. All right, everybody. I hope you had a great time, and I will see you mañana. I don't know what that means. It's a word, though, and that's the important part. Goodbye. Wait, I didn't click stop. Do you want to stop recording? Yeah, I want to stop recording. Linux.